Welcome everyone. We're just gonna wait a couple of more minutes just to let people come in, and then we will start. Thank you. All right, welcome everyone to SEO Space Lab webinar series, where we look at the newest and most exciting phenomena in the SEO cosmos. Don't forget to use the hashtag SEO Space Lab. In today's SEO Space Lab episode, we'll talk about how to navigate Google's transition from search to answer engine. Stay until the end of this episode, as I will be sharing Kevin's key takeaways at the end of the webinar. And if you have any question, please use the chat section and we'll answer them at the end. So I'm Emma Labrador, Head of Marketing at Oncrawl, and I will be your guest, your host. Sorry about that. My guest for this exciting episode is Kevin Indig. Kevin is working as VP SEO and content at G2. He has helped many companies to acquire users over the last 10 years and was previously working for Atlassian and Dailymotion. He loves user acquisition, brand building, and user retention, among other things. Kevin has worked for many companies like eBay, Eventbrite, Bosch, Samsung, just to name a few. So welcome, Kevin, to SEO Space Lab. I'm really happy to have you on board today. Anything else to add?
No, thanks so much for that kind introduction. I'm pumped to be here.
Cool. So, well, I guess it's your turn to dive into this exciting subject.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Can you see my screen?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, I'll jump right into this. So thanks everyone for tuning in. I'm not going to waste too much time introducing myself. Emma was so kind to already do that. But I'm pumped for you to tune into this because I have a lot to talk and a lot to tell. So the kind of reason or the direction that I'm coming from when talking about Google's transition from search to answer engine is that there are actually three big reasons for why this is happening right now and what is happening. And we're going to delve right into this. So first of all, in 2018, Google actually published a blog article in which they described the next 20 years in search. And that blog article was full of very, insightful information and sets the basis for everything that we see in SEO right now. The three fundamental takeaways from that blog article is that Google is going to transition or change from queries to a query-less experience, from answers to journeys, and from text to visuals. And all of that is stuff that we see in the search results today. But Google also introduced one very important piece of technology, which is the topic layer. The topic layer is very closely related to the so-called knowledge graph. And you probably remember that the knowledge graph is Google's database of entities, meaning of things like names or people or books. And the topic layer is the evolution of the knowledge graph. So if you wanted to visualize it or conceptualize it, you can imagine it like that. The topic layer basically sits on top of the knowledge graph. And while the knowledge graph deals with entities, The topic layer, as the name says, deals with topics like trends, opinions, ideas, or news. And Google is able to perfectly map those topics within the relationships that they all have with each other and the relationships to entities. So that's a very, very powerful piece of technology that allows Google to, for example, transition from queries to a queryless experience. And we'll see exactly what that looks like in just a second. But there's a second reason for why Google makes that transition right now, and it's that actually they have a lot of pressure to keep their success rate high. In fact, Google is probably the most successful startup in human history, period. No other company was able to pull in plus 20% year-over-year revenue growth. And the interesting thing is that this year, Google, for the first time ever, singled out the revenue that it makes from YouTube. And as you can already see on the slide, in relationship, the revenue from YouTube is actually increasing while the revenue from Google search is decreasing. Well, it's increasing in absolute terms, right? Google is still increasing the money that it makes from Google ads. But in relationship to its total revenue, that share is actually getting smaller. So in 2018, they still made 22% more revenue from Google ads compared to 2017. But in 2019, it was already only 15%. So the rate is becoming smaller, and that's very important because the growth rate or revenue rate of YouTube ads is getting bigger, right? And so that makes it a bit more difficult because Google needs to think about more revenue streams. Actually, in fact, in the last couple of years, Google got very lucky that smartphones had such a huge adoption rate because it allowed Google to show ads on both desktop and smartphone search results. And now they need to think about another ace that they can pull out of their sleeves. And then lastly, the third reason for why Google goes through that transition right now is because actually Google is isolated from a market that it can't access, which is China. And as you can see on this graph, where I compared the traffic to some of the biggest search engines, Baidu is actually the second biggest search engine in the world. It's not Bing, it's Baidu. And Baidu is already a tenth of the size of Google. And again, they're operating in a market that Google can't really access. And that puts Google under a lot of pressure, which is why they very openly say that they're going to shift. So last year at Google I/O, Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google and Alphabet now, which is a very interesting detail, publicly stated that they're going to transition from a search engine to an assistant that helps you getting things done. And again, that is probably one of the biggest transitions in SEO that we're seeing right now, and means that we as SEOs need to shift our mindsets if we want to stay successful. And so I observed that transition, and I wrote a lot about it on my blog and spoke at conferences. And then I was lucky to get two very big data sets from RankRanger and SEMrush. RankRanger was so kind to send me data of over 100,000 keywords, both for mobile and desktop, over the year 2019. And I picked 4 different SERP features out of that. Stuff like local packs, image thumbnails, image packs, and featured snippets. And I was also lucky to get data from SEMrush of over 1,200 domains. They have a tool called Traffic Analytics Tool, and I was lucky to get data for mobile and desktop across the year 2018 and 2019. And then I spent over 100 of hours digging through all that data and connecting the dots. And in the following, I want to present you my findings with the background of Google's shift from a search to an answer engine. The first thing that I found when I dug through all that data is that traffic on the internet actually shifts, and it shifts from certain verticals to others. And so, if you look at that beautiful bubble chart, I know it's a bit loaded, but it gets the point across that actually traffic from or to arts and entertainment verticals is increasing. You see that from 2018 to 2019, it increased from 26 to 29%. But it's decreasing in the technology area. And that's going to be really interesting. And we're going to deep dive into that just in a second. It's also increasing in science and education, and it's decreasing in so-called reference materials. So what does that actually mean? When we look at the traffic losers, meaning the domains that lost most organic traffic from 2018 to 2019, first of all, you'll see that all the color-coded URLs in yellow are actually those that fall into technology. And technology mainly consists of search engines and social networks, which actually get less organic traffic. The ones color-coded in blue are the reference material sites, stuff like Wikipedia or IMDb. And I think as SEOs who are spending a lot of time in search results, we can intuitively confirm that, for example, Wikipedia gets less organic traffic because Google might show a lot more answers directly in search results. But even Google.com itself has gotten a lot less organic traffic. And part of the reason here is that they just funnel more direct traffic to some of their apps, their web apps and their native apps. So I think for them, it's not a big of a problem as for other sites. When we look at the winners, we see that, first of all, the field is much more diverse. The winner URLs come from way more categories than the loser URLs or the user sites. The first interesting one is fandom.com. They grew like crazy in 2019, and that's mainly because they very successfully relaunched their site and then just shut up the ranks. By the way, it's a fan site if you're curious. Then of course we have neighbor.com, one of the few technology related sites, and that's the search engine from South Korea. But then we also have research and academia sites like academia.edu or researchgate.net, which Google gives a lot more presence in search results, which probably falls into Google's push to just provide more trustworthy news and trustworthy information. But then all the other sites are mainly from entertainment like Netflix or Quizlet or Roblox. And then we also have Microsoft as the only other second technology winner. There's actually another transition going on that is very exciting to watch right in front of our eyes, right? With the COVID-19 lockdown, what we're seeing at G2 is that some of these categories are exploding in terms of traffic. We see that our audio video conferencing categories are seeing 500 up to 500 times more traffic than in the weeks before the lockdown. And even some categories like telemedicine, e-notary, e-signature, or virtual desktop are much more sought after. So it's a very exciting time, and it's going to be even more exciting to see what the winner and loser sites are going to be looking like next year. But the gist of it is that traffic on the internet shifts. And what you can do about that, what the takeaway for you is to monitor the search volumes of your keywords. We as SEOs are very used to steady search volume, and actually most tools take the average of the 12 months of the year in terms of search volume. So seasonality is even not considered. But now all of that doesn't count anymore. And so in fact, a lot of SEO tools, not to offend anyone, but a lot of them report search volume on a monthly basis. But if you've been awake the last couple of weeks, you know that you probably need daily updates because everything is changing so quickly. And so I compiled 6 different tools that help you to better understand what these changes look like. Of course, there is the Google Trends, which I think is probably one of the most valuable SEO tools or market research tools right now. But then we also have other alternatives like Trendly or Exploding Topics or Glimpse, which all follow a very similar model and provide slightly different data that's based on Google search, Google Trends, YouTube, Amazon, and a couple of other sources. But then we also have Pinterest Trends, which is very interesting for the e-commerce sector. And then we have Hashtagify, which helps you to monitor and understand the searches for hashtags over time. So that should also be very interesting if you want to see upcoming trends. The next big thing that I found is that, of course, desktop is becoming less relevant. And we as SEOs, again, we intuitively know this, but it's very interesting to watch in the data. So actually, if you look at all the categories and summarize the desktop traffic, you'll see that in the last 2 years, desktop traffic actually shrank by almost 10%, which is major. And you also see that mobile traffic has grown to a size where it's twice as big as desktop right now. So that's absolutely stunning. And it's also more important for search engines. So this is again the traffic to the 4 search engines I mentioned before, this time showing mobile and desktop traffic in black. And the first thing that you see is that Google gets almost, or gets pretty much 1.5 times as much mobile traffic than desktop traffic. Bing gets 10 times more mobile than desktop traffic, and DuckDuckGo even gets 5 times more mobile than desktop traffic. And only Baidu is getting more desktop traffic than mobile, which was very surprising to me because China is such a mobile-heavy country. But I also got some data from the strongest URLs split into desktop and mobile. And so what you see here is that, for example, a site like YouTube gets a ton of desktop traffic, but not as much mobile traffic. And it's the exact opposite for a site like Facebook. And the explanation for this is that it strongly depends on your use case, right? You obviously have a much better experience when you watch YouTube on your desktop compared to your phone. And on the other hand, we're much more inclined to browse Facebook on our phones than on desktop. So interestingly, your traffic also depends on the use case. Another source of traffic I got was from Parsley, which is a audience analysis tool for publishers. And they found that in 2019, publishers got, in some cases, 20 times as much mobile traffic as desktop traffic. So for publishers, news sites, it's even more substantial. And they also validated that desktop traffic shrank. For publishers, it was even by a quarter in 2019. And then, of course, mobile traffic proportionally grew over time. And so what we as SEOs have to keep in mind here is to, of course, optimize for mobile first. You've probably heard this a billion times by now, but what I still see a lot of people do is to mistake their traffic as the decision driver here. What I mean by that is that a lot of people I hear are saying that, hey, we don't get a lot of mobile traffic, so mobile is not important to us. But in reality, mobile is now the basis for Google to evaluate your site, no matter how much traffic you get for desktop or mobile. So here, when you look at us at G2, for example, this is a screenshot from our Oncrawl setup, and you see that the desktop Googlebot only crawls our site 20% of the time, but we get 75% of our traffic from desktop devices. So long story short, it doesn't matter how much traffic you get per device, right? It matters how Google crawls your site. So make sure you monitor the hit distributions by bot name in your Oncrawl instance. At the same time, when we talk about optimizing for mobile first, just to recap that very quickly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, but we're first of all striving for parity between our desktop and mobile versions, especially when it comes to internal linking and content. Of course, you want to provide a good experience, so avoid any intrusive ads or pop-ups. You want to have parity between structured data as well. And you want to certainly invest into high quality images on mobile, not only because it is a good experience, but also because that's very important for Google Discover, which is another important traffic channel that you don't want to miss. When you're in an Oncrawl, you also want to compare your mobile with desktop Googlebot hits. So the reason for why I'm saying that is you want to make sure that the desktop Googlebot somewhat emulates the mobile the mobile Googlebot's crawl behavior. And the best way to do that is to compare the daily hits or the bot hits in general. But make sure you get to that view. You can do that in the Data Explorer, and you dive deep into that to understand where your mobile or desktop version maybe isn't as Googlebot friendly as you thought. And then, of course, you just want to have the awareness that the click-through rate or impressions or clicks are different on mobile versus desktop because the search results look different. There's another example at G2. For a brand, we get about 21% click-through rate desktop and only 7% on mobile. And part of the reason is that there is a competitor who's called G2 Esports. It's actually from Germany, so thank you, mates, for that. But the reality is that they're not taking away as many clicks on desktop than on mobile. So that's important to keep in mind. And the last thing to do is just simply to compare mobile and desktop traffic over time. What you see here in neon green is the total traffic. In neon blue, you see the desktop traffic, and in neon turquoise, you see the mobile traffic. And when you compare those two sources of traffic, you'll see that each one of them causes a dip in total traffic at a different time. But if we weren't segmenting our traffic into mobile and desktop, we would not understand what is actually happening. So if you have to do investigative SEO and you see dips in any traffic, split your traffic into devices and then segment further from there. Another interesting finding that I got from the data is, of course, related to featured snippets. And so the first thing that I wanted to confirm is that, of course, featured snippets are growing in the US. In fact, on mobile, they grew by almost a third. And when I'm saying they're growing, that I'm talking about the percentage of search results that contain a featured snippet, right? So in the US, they grew by about a third. On mobile and on desktop, almost by 50%. I also looked at Germany, where the growth was even more substantial. On mobile, we saw almost 100%, and then on desktop, still a third. And then I compared that with the UK, where we saw that there was a small increase on mobile, but a decrease even in terms of desktop featured snippets. So Google doesn't shy away from turning those up and down, depending on how they affect the user experience, I guess, for people, or how helpful they are. Now, Google also announced that they're not continuing to deduplicate featured snippets in the search results. And what that means is that before end of January, you were able to have the featured snippet and rank in the organic results. Now that's one big thing, right? Now there is no position 0 anymore, but the featured snippet is position 1, so to say. And that was reason enough for me to dig into 2,000 featured snippets at G2 and actually see how that impacted us. And the interesting thing that I found is that there was not a big impact. So I think we saw like barely minus 1% in click-through rate before and after, but it didn't have a substantial impact on traffic. So the important thing to keep in mind here is that when you do an analysis like that, you have to separate between mobile and desktop. I mentioned that before, and I want to mention that again here because the search results look different. When we compare CTR, we have to segment by device. Now, again, I didn't see a major change before and after, but I was stunned that the average click-through rate is still 43% across the board. So it does make a lot of sense to actually occupy the featured snippet. Even more so, I connected the dots by comparing the traffic of my data set with the featured snippets. And what I found was a correlation, better said, a negative correlation between traffic and featured snippets. So in a nutshell, if a featured snippet shows up, that all of the sites that are ranking across the board are seeing less traffic. And the way that I explain that to myself is that simply users are more inclined to click on the featured snippet. So the site that is occupying the featured snippet gets more traffic, but everybody else gets less. It just simply pulls more attention, which intuitively makes sense, but I was able to also confirm that in the data. And once again, I did that on mobile and on desktop. The correlation is negative. It is slightly lower in mobile, but I think with a minus 0.4 or minus 0.5, we're still in a range where for SEO studies or research, I think those correlations are actually not too shabby. And then what you can do in this case, of course, is a couple of things. So first of all, you can use a tool like SEMrush to filter for all your keywords where you're ranking on position 1 to 5, because that's where Google usually sources featured snippets from. And you can filter by the keywords that you rank on position 1 to 5 for, but where you don't occupy the featured snippets, in the hope to optimize your content, and I'll show you in a second how, so that you actually get the featured snippet. You can also do that in Ahrefs, of course. Both tools have that functionality, and it's important that you keep in mind to filter for position 1 to 5, again, because that's where, at least for now, Google sources the featured snippet from. There are some outlier and edge cases, I know that, but on broad basis, most of those featured snippets are still coming from the first 5 results. And so that once you have that down, a good tactic that I successfully applied to myself, but that I learned from Moz, is the so-called pyramid tactic. And the pyramid tactic is a simple way to structure your content. So when you write for featured snippets, you want to make sure that you give the answer to the question right away at the very top of your content, and then you home in on the context, and then you explain the background of that answer. So in most cases, you'd probably start the other way around, but when you write for featured snippet, make sure to give the answer right away. and I think you have a higher success rate to actually get the featured snippet. The next big trend that I saw is that search is actually becoming more visual. And it's not a surprise because in the blog article that I referenced in the intro, the author Ben Gomez actually wrote about that they're planning to do exactly that, right? So I mentioned that Google is transitioning from text to visuals, but in the blog article, Ben Gomez, the SVP of News, Search and Assistant, which is an interesting title, by the way, explained that they're now able to model hundreds of millions of fine-grained concepts for images and videos, which in itself is pretty stunning. But we also saw that reflected in the search results. So on March 7th last year, image thumbnails in mobile search results actually completely exploded. So you see that they increased very steeply and stayed stagnant ever since. And so opposed to featured snippets, for example, which are much more dynamic and where I suspect Google testing a lot more, for image thumbnails, Google pretty much made the decision that they want to show more image thumbnails, and this is the way that it's going to be, right? You don't see these up and down trends. You see it pretty stagnant. And then image boxes, on the other hand, that's something where Google seems to be testing a bit more, because you see that they increased and in around mid-April, but then towards September, they also decreased again, right? So this is a case where Google turned them up and then realized, okay, it's maybe not the user experience that we want, and then turned them down again. And then interestingly, in the US, the image boxes on desktop actually separated from the ones on mobile. So Google is not just testing before and after, but Google is also testing SERP features on devices. And in some cases, they might decide that on desktop, they want to keep them or increase them and do the opposite on mobile. I was also able to connect traffic to image boxes on, in my data set. And what I found is that image boxes are even bigger traffic killers than featured snippets, which was completely surprising to me. So in fact, whenever image boxes are present, your chance of getting traffic is very low. So in fact, the correlation here is strong negative with minus 0.7. And that means, again, whenever you have image boxes ready, whenever you have image boxes shown, make sure to have an image ready to rank in that image box, because your organic result might not get as many clicks. So as I already took that away, invest in structured audio and video content. Of course, any visual content will do. So it doesn't have to be video, it can also be images. In best case, all three of them. But one thing that we're definitely seeing is that the search results are becoming more visual, and that Google doesn't shy away to show more video snippets or so-called key moments where they point at very specific parts of a video. And now, of course, also started to show more podcast episodes in search. So for us as SEOs, that's actually a similar opportunity or shortcut as when Google started to show more images in search about 10 years ago, because we can bypass very strong and stagnant organic results from competitors. So when you invest into audio or video content, make sure that you structure it, make sure you give timestamps, whether it's audio or video, because you can already see that YouTube references a lot of those timestamps, and key moments in search might also revert back to those. On the left, you see a screenshot from my podcast on YouTube. On the right, you see it on Google Podcast. So you see that podcast doesn't yet really have jump marks, but I could definitely see that coming. And because timestamps are such a standard, I can definitely see that Google will rely more on those in the future. Of course, as I already mentioned, you don't want to forget Google Podcasts. You can actually very quickly submit your RSS feed, and then whenever somebody searches for your name or your show, podcast episodes will display right in the search results. And let's see what else Google will use those for. I personally think there's a lot more to come. And we already talk about audio content that gets more usage. Let me make another prediction here, which is that I think that featured snippets will be mainly replaced by how-to videos in the future. So I think it's already a good time to invest into videos in general, but across the board, videos are just a much, much better answer to explain something than text. And I think that Google will push more of those through. Google also wants to keep users in the search results. I already told you how much pressure they have to generate more revenue and or like tighten their revenue streams. And because they're still so reliant on ads, I expect them to push this trend even further. And the way that reflects is in so-called SERP mazes. So here in this example, we actually see a keyword that's very important to us, best graph database. And I was very happy to see when I first discovered this featured snippet that we even have these nice little image thumbnails, and expected those to just give us more attention. But in fact, when you click on those thumbnails, you get to another search result and not to our site, which is a bit, spicy, I would say. But reality is that Google just funnels users to another search result where they can display more ads. And then on mobile, it's even more infuriating because you see this nice accordion on top of our search result. But when you click on one of those, Google actually shows your result and then your competitor right next to you. Competition is just a swipe away, which means that you have a lower chance of actually getting traffic for the featured snippet. And then Google also started to roll out so-called cameos, which are video answers in search results that is now limited to only a few people who can apply for cameos, but that I think Google might roll out even further in the future, keeps people longer in the search results and keeps them more engaged. It gets really crazy when you Google for something like movies because you can buy movie tickets right in the search results. If you're not sure what you want to watch, you just Google that and you find a lot of inspiration. You also find reviews and the platform that you can watch it on, which, as you can see, Google starts to show its own reviews even more so, which is bad news for Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb. But again, if you're unsure what to watch, you see a pretty nice carousel on desktop, which will certainly occupy all your screen and help you make a decision. It gets even crazier when you click on this little arrow and you get these so-called query refinement bubbles. Maybe there's a sexier name for those out there somewhere, but German and I call things the way they are. So all stats aside, those are actually pretty important because they help Google better understand what users actually want when they use an ambiguous keyword like what to watch, right? It's pretty hard to interpret what people might want. So Google has more feedback mechanisms and search results to better understand what people want. And that's important for us. About 2 years ago, Google published this report on their market research blog, which is Think with Google, that says that the searches, at least on mobile, that include the keyword best or the modifier best have actually grown by 80% over the past 2 years. And that's very important because that does not only apply to luxury products, but to everyday stuff like luggage or like umbrellas or deodorants. And that's important for us marketers to keep in mind, because what that means is that we need to better understand our target audience or our consumers and understand what they mean when they Google for best, right? So for example, when we talk about smartphones, for some people, best might mean the cheapest. For other people, best might mean the most durable. And us as marketers, we have to keep that in mind. We need to understand that, and we need to align our SEO strategies towards that. My favorite example is when you Google what to make for breakfast, for once because I really love breakfast, but also because we see our query refinement bubbles again here. And then it gets really scary when you actually click on one of those because you get the recipe right in the search results. There's actually no more site needed here, which, well, you take that for whatever it is. What can we do here actually? Well, first of all, stay away from simple ambiguous queries, or at least don't overly focus on them. An example for an ambiguous query, besides what to watch or movies, could also be something like Prince, right? Which could be Prince Harry, Prince Andrew, but it could also be the musician Prince. So whenever it's hard to understand what the query actually means, Google will show all sorts of SERP features to make sure that it captures some answer for that query. So for you as a site, that's bad news because you'll probably get less traffic. So you want to stay away from those. And in a lot of times, those are actually short head keywords. So again, there is a recommendation to go further towards the long tail. You also want to invest in building a destination. One of the winners of my study is Booking.com. And Booking.com was actually able to increase their organic traffic by over 50% from 2018 to 2019, which in itself is impressive. But even more so, over 50% of their total traffic comes from directs. So they were able to build a destination and are less reliant on platforms like Facebook and Google, even though they're still one of the biggest spenders on Google Ads. But they just, trained people into the habit of going directly to Booking.com. And that's very important because it helps them to funnel users into environments that they can better control, like web or native apps and email. In fact, when you visit Booking.com and you're not logged in, they will immediately provide you an offer for you to sign up, which will then help them again to better understand what you want to decide, but also ping you more offers and understand you better as a customer, which I recommend to everybody to do out there as well. We should also consider focusing on keywords without SERP features. So again, SEMrush and Ahrefs both have that functionality where you can actually show only keywords that do not show a SERP feature. And here you have a more level playing field for the good old 10 blue links, where a position number one actually has a higher ROI in terms of traffic. So, again, like on one hand, you want to look at the SERP features that you don't occupy, like a featured snippet, but also on the other hand, consider the exact opposite, which is search results without SERP features. So to bring that all together and to recap that, you want to avoid ambiguous queries and invest in feature-free SERPs, or invest in content that ranks in feature-free SERPs. You want to try to build a destination and build a strong brand, so you're less reliant on other channels and platforms. And when you do that, don't forget to funnel users into environments that you can actually control. And again, like especially I'm pretty bullish about email for once, because there's actually a vacuum that apps like Slack or Microsoft Teams created, because now we're using less email at work, and we can fill that vacuum with good email newsletters. But at the same time, I also think that a lot of, or most brands are actually not doing a good job in email. So that just as a friendly nudge to take a look at that again and see if you can maybe rework your strategy. But we also want to go for featured snippets when we rank in the top 5, and we want to use the pyramid tactic. In terms of audio content formats, you definitely want to invest more in images, videos, and audio formats. And then lastly, monitor your mobile and desktop traffic and ranking, so you know really what's going on and where the actual opportunities are. And with that, I want to thank you very much for your attention. If you liked some of that stuff, you will see a lot more of that content on my website, kevin-indig.com. I also write a free weekly newsletter called TechBound. So yeah, check it out. Thanks for tuning in. And with that, I'm open to answer whatever question you have.
Thank you, Kevin. I absolutely love your presentation. So thank you very much for your time. So if you want to find Kevin's top takeaways from this conference, you can head to the handout part in the GoToWebinar app. So we just shared them, so feel free to download the PDF. So I guess we have a few questions actually. So let me read them. Mm-hmm. So the first one. It's a question from Rebecca. I think we're all familiar with the old recommendation for snagging featured snippets. You mentioned giving the answer to the question at the top of the content. Is there anything else you recommend to snag featured snippets?
Yes. So I usually do a lot of in-depth research on competitor featured snippets when one of my competitors is ranking. And what I'm looking about specifically are two things. First, how is the heading before the answer that appears in a featured snippet phrased, right? It's usually an H2 or H3 tag. Exceptions apply, of course. And then the second thing that I'm looking at is the answer. How is it phrased? What is the value proposition that the answer provides, right? And of course, we have to distinguish between a list featured snippet or a paragraph featured snippet. And even when it's a list, make sure with to distinguish between bulleted and numbered lists. But for me, the thing that I'm trying to understand is what are they providing the user in terms of value, in terms of implied meaning that my content is not providing. So make sure you have the right format, make sure you get or you have an understanding of user intent, meaning what people actually try to find out, and then try to give a better answer in your content. I know that's very meta and there's unfortunately no way to quantify that, but some of those featured snippets provide, like, they send really juicy tons of traffic. So I usually go very in depth, and that's kind of my mental framework that I apply.
Okay, thanks. Makes sense. I got another question actually. Here's a question. I've heard some mentions that image boxes and carousel art competition for feature snippet clicks in the SERPs. Have you seen any interference between different SERP features on the clicks you can earn?
Yeah, so the biggest ones, again, I found were featured snippets and image boxes. I also looked for local packs and image thumbnails and didn't find a big impact on traffic. Image thumbnails make sense, right? That's basically an extension of the result itself. So I would have been shocked if that would have led to fewer traffic or less traffic. But surprisingly, local packs did not have as big of an impact on traffic. And to extend it even further, of course, like there's way more that I found in my research, and I tried to limit that a little bit for this webinar. But I even found that local packs are actually declining in the US. I know a lot of people are very skeptic when they hear that. I was myself, because my intuitive assumption was that we're seeing more local packs, but it seems that at least in the US, at least on mobile, we're seeing fewer local packs. In terms of clicks or other SERP features that take away or drag away clicks, I was able to anecdotally find knowledge cards to take away a lot of clicks from organic results, but I wasn't able to get enough data to really make the case for that. So that's still on my to-do list.
Thanks, Kevin.
Sure.
Another question. So, do you really believe in the voice search? It's a pretty an open question, but
very skeptical in voice search, and let me elaborate on that a little bit, because as always in SEO it depends, but I don't want to leave you hanging with the depends. So first of all, I do think that we'll come to a point where the interaction with voice devices is going to become more important, because those assistants are going to get smarter, and as they get smarter, we understand that we can use them for more things, and we'll do that. I just don't believe that this will take away from actual searches on on desktop or mobile. And the reason I'm saying that is because all or most answers that a voice assistant could give that I see people actually using, I think already don't deliver a lot of traffic and search results. A good example is sports, right? Imagine you want to, like you're an NBA fan and the Chicago Bulls just played and you want to get an update on where they are. When you Google NBA or Chicago Bulls, whether on desktop or on mobile, you'll get the answer right away. You do not need to go to any website. So for such, for if you ask your Google Home, like, hey Google, like what's the status or the score of the game, Bulls versus Warriors, like that is not a query that would have given you a lot of traffic anyway, right? And so for other related searches, for example, a commentary on that game or maybe some background stats, that might be already harder to put in the context for a voice assistant. So from my standpoint of view, I just don't really see that voice search is going to take away a lot from the traffic that we currently get that is not already taken away from Google. And I think we still have a good way to go until voice assistants can actually provide that killer feature that makes you just that makes you blow your mind and use voice assistant on a regular basis. I think now currently the use cases for voice assistant is very limited. It's usually related to the weather, jokes, play some songs, right? Maybe some people use it to get a feed on their emails, but again, it's just not yet at the level where an assistant can deliver you information that would then make you stop Googling it.
That was a tricky one. So I got another question from Jay. Based on your findings, and given the fact that rich results give a more complete answer right within the SERP. Those position 0 feature snippet tend to have a better or worse CTR than a position 1 results in a SERP with no featured snippets. Hope you got everything.
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. I think it's a really good one. And I found in my data that it does have a better CTR. The reason for why, first of all, like sure, it's visually more highlighted, so it catches people's attention faster, and we see that in our data as well. But then I think another reason for that is because a featured snippet just has a higher likelihood to create anticipation of the content, which I see just leads to simply more clicks. Whereas the classic traditional organic result just simply has a short title that seems to get shorter and shorter because of mobile, and then has a description that it seems a lot of people, like there are mixed results or mixed findings of how many people actually look at them, and then it has URL. But a featured snippet already has a part of the answer. So across the board, it has a higher CTR. However, there is a small group of keywords or queries that where the answer in featured snippets is good enough and the user intent is shallow enough for people to not actually click through. But I've seen in my data that in most times that's just not the case, and they lead to a higher CTR.
Thanks. Actually got some pretty interesting questions today. So another one from Steve. How will answer snippets impact how we track traffic from organic in the future? How reliable will our data be since users will get answers directly on search engines without editing a site?
Yeah, that's a killer question. That's a question I've been thinking about. No, that's amazing. I love that because that's been on my mind for the last couple of weeks or maybe months. And where I'm at right now is that actually most of our tracking is very unreliable and very, very, very shallow. And you're absolutely right. We don't have that classic top to bottom structure of results anymore. It's much more a grid perspective, if you want to revert to design speak. So you remember like back in the days, every website was a table, and they would all just be tables, and that was your structure. And nowadays you actually design in the manner of grids. And the same thing happens to search results, right? It was the top result, and then there was a bottom result. But now we have a knowledge graph on the right side, and we have some other stuff that's floating around and some direct answers. So we don't have that same structure anymore, and that means that our tracking is much less reliable in terms of position and in terms of clicks. So I'm very curious to see what rank tracking tools in the future will provide for that. But then as well as search volumes, that's another thing that I just find harder and harder to use in my day-to-day, and that's why I'm relying more on other tools that give me better perspective of what's actually searched. None of that is perfect, and I doubt that there is a perfect solution. But we have, as SEOs, I think, first of all, we need to understand that our data is becoming more imperfect, and that's a tragic story that has been going on for many years. Basically started when Google switched to HTTPS and didn't give us the keyword referrer anymore. So that data is highly inaccurate. But if you think about it, if search volume is inaccurate, that means that we do a lot of keyword decisions based on inaccurate data. So I'm becoming a higher or a bigger fan of actually using impressions instead of search volumes. And I'm trying to build my own database. And again, this is something that I'm exploring right now that you'll probably see in the future in my talks and presentations. But I'm exploring what it could look like if we use impressions as a replacement for search volume. And that's of course only also dependent on if you actually have search volume at different positions, right? But imagine you were to create content that ranks or slowly increases in rank for a keyword, and you're able to understand how many impressions you get at every position, and then you build a so-called impression or search volume curve, which is similar to the click curve. So now it gets a bit abstract and crazy, but I totally agree with your sentiment that our data is getting less perfect or more problematic, and that we need to find better solutions to monitor how successful we are, but also where to invest in. And I hope that kind of came across a little bit from my presentation. Am I still on, Emma? Hey man, can you hear me? Am I still on, or did I drop off here?
Oh, sorry, my mic was actually off. My bad.
No problem.
Okay, here again. So the last question is, what would you say is the lowest hanging fruit when it comes to using structured data on your pages? Where is the good place to start?
Yeah. That is a good question. I personally see a lot of low-hanging fruit in reviews, actually, reviews and star rating snippets. So for us at G2, they're of course very important. We're a software marketplace where you can find tons of software reviews, and we've seen them very successfully actually showing up in search results. And if you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to provide you a couple of examples. That's something that Google apparently still, like, first of all, caches. So once you have them, they stay on for longer. And two, where Google is still ready to pick them up and show them in search results, as long as you don't try to game the system. You probably noticed that a couple of months ago, Google published a blog article in which they said that they're going to pay more attention to those. But even though Google announced that, they're still giving a lot of review snippets. So I think that to me is one of the best ways to capture attention in the search results, and one of the best ways to use structured data that actually translates into an ROI, as in like more traffic.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much, Kevin, for your time. This is the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. So our next SEO Space Lab episode will focus on how to build and develop a successful technical SEO community on Reddit. We'll have amazing guests, Paul Shapiro, Patrick Stocks, Jeff Luella, and Russell Jones. So they will join me on April 28th. So don't forget to register for this episode on our website and follow #SEO Space Lab for more news. Thank you again, Kevin, for your time. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you. So bye-bye.
Thanks for having me on, and thanks for everybody to tune in.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks.